This morning we're back looking at this picture of the home, and I'll tell you, or John, I'll tell you up front, it's going to be kind of a flyby. It's going to be kind of an overview. I just feel like if not, then we'd probably be here for 20 weeks or so, and I don't think that's an exaggeration. It's that important. The Bible has a lot to say about the home, but we're not trying to stop and study the home. We're trying to go through the book of Ephesians, and while at the same time I do think it's that important, I don't want to lose the flow of the picture of this letter. So we have slowed down some, and we'll probably do it for one more lesson. But we are, I was kidding Brooch back there, told her I think I have 17 points. I actually don't know if that's a joke, but we'll see. That being said, I am going to try to Brother Hamilton, if you see the top of my head more than usual, that's because as long as I'm looking down, I'm just going faster. And I do want to try to go over all of these things. Ephesians chapter 5, verse 23, for the husband is the head of the wife, even as, here's that simile, even as Christ is the head of the church, and he is the Savior of the body. Therefore, going back to because of this commitment, because the husband is as Christ, because the treatment of the husband for the wife is similar to the treatment of Christ for the church, because of these things, because of this, therefore, as the church is subject unto Christ, so let the wives be to their own husbands in everything. Husbands, love your wives, even as Christ also loved the church and gave himself for it. Now, this picture talks about the headship. It talks about the leadership responsibility of the man in the home. I'll give you a quote by Adrian Rogers when talking about the home. And in fact, when speaking about this very verse, he says, we, men, can never be over those things that God wants under us, never over those things God wants under us, until we get under those things that God has put over us. And I do believe that is the big challenge. I made this statement last week. I believe this statement. I believe the problem with the home begins with the man. And what we like to do is we like to put all the pressure on the woman. But I think I'll go even further. I believe the problem in the home is not with the child. It's with the father. But still, we are always wanting to talk about what the children need to do. Firmly believe if we put forth as Christ, women want to follow. Who doesn't want a secure, nourished environment, a free, forgiving environment? Who doesn't want to live in that? But nobody wants to live in this. And I do believe that is the challenge. Now, when you talk about the things we need to get under, for sure, one of the things we need to be under, if we're going to be a leader, is we need to be under his word. And his word has a lot of things to say. That's what we're going to try to go through this morning. We covered 3 of these last week. I want to go ahead and get them out there. When we're talking about leadership, there are some things the Bible says about how we should lead. First, our leadership should not be passive. It should be engaged. It should be involved. As the head, as the leader, we're held accountable. I use this as an illustration. We went to Hebrews chapter 13, verse 17, where it says, obey them that have the rule over you. Submit yourselves. Why? For they watch for your soul as those that must give an account. And everywhere God gives leadership responsibility, he gives leadership accountability. And so, Brother Wayne, sometimes I'm a guy. I do not like to hear that things are my fault. You know what I like to do? It's your fault. But if everything rises and falls on leadership, famous John R. Rice quote, and if God holds the leader responsible, then, Brother Maddox, there's a lot of things, unfortunately, I'm at fault for. Now, you know what? I have a good God who knows that I'm learning and that I'm growing, who's forgiving, who's loving, but he requires me to come back under and submit and repent. And so we got to learn and look at what these things are. And I'm going to tell you, at the very top, we have to be engaged. The preacher one time gave me a book that was written by an official. It was written by a referee. Brother Hanky gave me this book when I was coaching. Not the best thing to do. But there was one, there are 2 key thoughts in there. One I loved, one I didn't. And I'm going to talk about that here in a few minutes. But the big key was, if you're going to be a good official, you have to not be afraid to make the call. You have to not be afraid to in fact, if Donnie, I'm sorry for the game, but if you ask my opinion what was wrong with the game is they didn't make enough calls. Okay. You You have to be. You can't be afraid to make the call, because when you don't, and you don't, and then you do, you got chaos. And then that game last night was full of chaos, and that's what happens in life. Brother Maddox, we can't be afraid to fail to the point that we do nothing. Can't be passive. You have to be engaged, and that's the first thing that's required. Now, when you're engaged, it's how do you engage? Brother Wayne, how do we engage in this leadership picture? Well, the perfect picture of this is right before the Last Supper, where all the apostles are over there, and you know what they're doing? Who's going to be the biggest leader? And the answer is, you know who the biggest leader is? It's the one who wants to serve. In fact, in Luke, it paints the picture of, you know who the biggest leader is? It's the one who's going to be the younger, the one who's going to do all the work, the one down here at the servant level. And so, yes, we can't be passive, and we have to lead, but how do we lead? We lead in a servant-loving leadership. Now, that brought us to number 2, and that is, therefore, as the church is subject to Christ, so let wives be subject to their own husbands and everything. Husbands, love your wives. This servant love, this attitude of servant leadership, it's singular. It's just for your wife. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to cultivate this attitude, this place, this period where Brother Hank and Miss Debbie feels loved. She feels valued. She feels safe. She feels okay to fail, and she expects help to grow. And we use this picture of a magnet. It's like, we don't order love. We don't make love happen. We can't even really teach love. Love is something that's passed on. And it's like the magnet and the iron. You leave that iron close enough to the magnet long enough, what happens? It gets magnetized. You bring love into that house enough, you know what? It's hard not to come out loving. And so the challenge for us is to actually exhibit this singular love. Third, and I think we got here too, it's a sacrificial love. By that we made this point. It's volitional. Ms. Maddox, it's by choice. That's what makes it so special. Brother Maddox has to choose to set aside all of the I wants in life and make her best in life more important, and that just changes the attitude. When there's no wonder whether it's because he wants to do it, but it's because he thinks it's best for me, who doesn't want to follow that? Who doesn't want to submit in that arena? There really shouldn't be a place for the I just don't feel like it in the Christian home said by the man. We shouldn't live in that life. We're supposed to put forth the sacrificial love. Now, I don't know if we got these. I didn't go back to look. I hate listening to myself. But fourth was a sanctifying love. Verse 26, husband, love your wives, even as Christ also loved the church and gave himself for it, that he might sanctify and cleanse it with the washing of water by the word. It's a great picture there. It takes us right to the washing, so we'll use that as an illustration. And I just want to get through these so we can get into the next section. But this picture here is the picture of the washing at the Last Supper. And we just got done talking about the Last Supper. Brother Maddox, at the Last Supper when he says, if you want to be great, be a servant. And then he paints the picture for us and shows it what it is. The servant is the picture of this washing the feet. And it's the great picture there. Because, Peter, wash all of me. Now, here's the picture for the home. You know what? When you chose to marry Mrs. Maddox, you took her out of the world and you set her apart for you. Become one flesh. So all of that stuff that existed pre-marriage, you separated that. We don't need to be going back and forth into all of those things and all of those problems. That past doesn't need to continually be brought up. No, it needs to be dealt with so it's not repeated. But you're pulled out from that. Okay? Now, once you're pulled out from that, the work's not done. Every day you have a responsibility to help her grow. To put forth that nourishment and that arena where that flower blooms. And this is where we want to go and get coffee. Well, I want to go get coffee. I got to be careful because my wife's here this time. So it's like, come on, she just doesn't grow. I don't care. She just stays the same. She just. Well, then you being wise, you know what you're going to tell me? You're going to tell me, well, what kind of environment? What kind of nourishment are you putting in there? See, because it's really easy to put the fault right there. But the responsibility is right here. Then it's really easy to put the responsibility, but it's not. It's right here. You don't like the flower that's blooming? You might check what kind of food you're giving it. What kind of water is there? 5th, 28, 29. Well, let's go back to 25. Husbands, love your wives, even as Christ also loved the church and gave himself for it, that he might sanctify and cleanse it with the washing of the water by the word, that he might present it to himself a glorious church, not having spot or wrinkle or any such thing, but that it should be holy and without blemish. Well, just who wouldn't want a wife like that? So ought men to love their wives, even as their own bodies. He that loveth his wife loveth himself. For no man yet hateth his own flesh. But what does he do? He nourishes his flesh, and he cherishes his flesh, even as the Lord the church. And that's how we're supposed to. So this fifth picture is this is supposed to be a sensitive love. We love as we love our own bodies. It's back to that same picture, Brother Wayne, where we're creating a safe space. We're creating a preferred space. We're creating a space where she's lifted up, where she's praised, where she's encouraged. And I'll just do this. I'm going to turn to Corinthians chapter 13. I've said this numerous times. I'll say it one more time. I think we should read this chapter at least once a month. Brother Hank, I think we need challenge. It is not natural for man to love. And we get that so deterred. We make ourselves feel like we're being loving, and the other person, here's a great picture to challenge us every month. 1 Corinthians chapter 13, we'll start reading in verse 3. And though I bestow all my goods to feed the poor, and though I give my body to be burned, just starting right there. So can you do any more? Jade, can Eric be any more sacrificial than to give his body to be burned? Well, we all like to say, I would die for my wife. Is there any problem? You don't want him to die. You want him to live for you. And give my body to be burned, and have not charity, it profiteth me nothing. Now here we go. Charity suffereth long. I know it's going to be hard, and I know it's going to require some patience, but I'm not going to quit, and I'm going to keep going. It's kind. I'm doing this. I'm continuing with kindness, not with overbearing chest pounding. In kindness, charity envieth not. Charity vaunteth not itself. It's not puffed up. Charity doth not behave itself unseemingly. How we ever justify our tirades. It seeketh not her own. It's not easily provoked. It thinketh no evil. Rejoiceth not in iniquity, but rejoiceth in the truth. Beareth all things, believeth all things, hopeth all things, endureth all things. Where do we get the right to quit? Charity never faileth. So we get this picture of a sensitive love. Rob, love as we love ourselves. Well, I don't really. No, we nourish ourselves. We take care of ourselves. We listen to ourselves. A sensitive love where we love that 1 Corinthians chapter 13. Verse 31, it's a permanent love. For this cause shall a man leave his father and mother, and shall be joined unto his wife, and the two shall be one flesh. We've learned how to do a lot of things, but we can't do that yet. Can't separate one into two. What God has joined together, no man has a right to even try to take apart. Verse 32, it is a very significant type of love. This is a great mystery, but I speak concerning Christ and the church. Here you go. What's the significance? The significance is, Brother Wayne, you represent Christ. You said that at the beginning, but it closes with this picture. You represent Christ. Man represents this horizontal picture of this vertical relationship. People, by seeing this, are supposed to be attracted to this. The love we have that we show in our homes is not only, Deuteronomy chapter 6, supposed to be passed on to our children, but it should be attractive to the world. It's pretty significant. I want to look at another significant responsibility, and that's why we rushed through. Brother Hank, another significant responsibility in the home for men is to be the father. Now, like I said, we're kind of just doing a flyby, but we need to think about these things. Ephesians chapter 6, children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Starts out much like it does for the woman. Be submissive. Children, obey. But keep going. Honor thy father and mother, which is the first commandment with promise, that it may be well with thee, that thou mayest live long on the earth. And ye fathers, provoke not your children to wrath, but bring them up in the nurture and admonition of the Lord. Children ought to be obedient. But we're to be fathers. We're to nurture them. We're to train them. We're to teach them. We're to bring them up. Let me show you how important it is. Malachi chapter 4. This will be the last chapter. Malachi chapter 4. 3 verses. I hope I gave you all 3 verses. Remember ye the law of Moses, my servant, which I commanded unto him in Horeb for all Israel with the statutes and judgments. Remember the giving of the 10 commandments. Now, right in this same picture, the giving of the 10 commandments. In fact, these are the last verses in the Old Testament. Behold, I will send you Elijah the prophet before the coming of the great and dreadful day of the Lord, and he shall turn the hearts of the fathers to the children, and the hearts of the children to their fathers, lest I come and smite the earth with a curse. The very ending of the Old Testament ends with the importance of the fathers caring for the children and the children's relationship with the father. In fact, that's so important. If it doesn't happen, the land will be cursed. Judgment's coming. Now, how does he start the New Testament? Luke chapter 1, you got that one too? Luke 1:17, this is talking about John the Baptist, what John the Baptist is going to do. And he shall go before him in the spirit and power of Elias to turn the hearts of the fathers and to the children and the disobedient, the wisdom of the just, to make ready a people prepared for the Lord. You know what he's going to do? The Old Testament ends with fathers to children, children to fathers. The New Testament begins with fathers to children, children to fathers. It's that important. It is important that we be good fathers. Society is cursed if that doesn't happen. Why is it so important? Again, this is overview. I'm going to give you 3 quick thoughts. 1, I think fathers are the mirror. This has been taught many times. I think the preacher has taught it before. Fathers are the mirror for the home. By that, what do I mean? I mean, when the children are starting to sort out who they are, what their identity is, what they're supposed to do, how they fit in things, what their value is, they look to the father. Bruce. They look to the father, which is why fathers need to be careful belittling and criticizing their children. I didn't say correcting. I said belittle or criticize. When you start to look at the home, boy, let me tell you, you get inundated. Your brain just gets... One illustration was the dad who kept telling the daughter that she was too fat, and so that no man would ever want her. There's so much wrong with that. How about her whole value comes from pleasing a man? You represent Christ. Her value is the specialness that she gets from God. Or this one, I got to tell you, this one's close to my heart. One dad from a blended family got so angry at his 12-year-old son that he yelled at him and told him, "You're not even mine. You're nothing but the result of a one-night stand." Brother Maddox, I got to tell you, I know why he did that. Because he was angry and he wanted to hurt that boy. And he did. See, I was adopted. I was that boy. Rob, I can remember to this day when my dad yelled at me and said, "You're not even mine. I don't care what you do." Bruce, I don't even know what my real father, DNA father, looks like. I know very little about him. I've known one dad my entire life. Do you know what that did to a 10-year-old boy? Over and over. Over and over. You want to talk the ultimate bullying. Miss Max, you want to know why I study the home so much? One time, Lorraine, one time I went to my mom, the perfect person. One time I went to my mom to complain about this. Because I wanted her to fix it. I wanted her to do something about it. My mom was very wise. Well, not her first statement. Her first statement wasn't too smart. Mom, sorry, but that first statement wasn't too smart. First statement. Well, that's just the way Dad loves. Okay, well, if you know me at all, I will fight for what love is. Don't try to mix that word up. We don't get to define what love is. God defines what love is. That treatment is godly. Let's not cut it short. We need to grow in love. We're weak in love. There's problems with love, but love is godly. And so, but I was not in a place to argue with my mom or smart enough. But I listened to her. But here's where she got really smart. She said, you know, your dad's dad was a drunk. He just doesn't know. This is an opportunity for you to show him better. Now, that did two things. One, I never complained to my mom again because I didn't want to hear that. And two, you know where it put the responsibility? On me. I couldn't blame him anymore. Now, I may be 10, but at 10, I had to grow up in a way that lots of times you don't. And I'm very thankful for that. But I want you to understand, fathers are the mirror. They show the home a picture of what it's like, of who you are. Fathers are supposed to do that. Just like Christ showed us a picture, how we should love our wives, we show that picture to the home. Second, fathers are a thermostat. They set the temperature. And that starts with how you treat mom. Do you respect her or do you demean her? Do you treat her like a silly little girl? Do you yell at her? Do you cuss at her? Do you call her lazy? Is she immature? Is she stupid? Let me tell you, walls have ears. You'll pass on some very rebellious, disrespectful, victim-based mentality if you do that. You set that temperature. In your home, does every little disagreement end up into a fight? Dad sets the temperature. We need to be careful as fathers because we can saddle kids with a very heavy weight. And third, I think fathers are the compass. Where's the child going to go? How are they going to look at life? How are they going to deal with problems, with challenges? Simple question. Are you happy to stay the same year after year? No growing, never getting better, no improving, no learning, no investing in anything. Life is full of, I'm fine, I'm going to watch TV, I'm going to live paycheck to paycheck. I've got no goals, no initiative. I waste time, I waste money, and I blame the world when I'm unhappy. Because you can pass that straight on to your kids. Those are pretty important roles. I am very thankful that I grew up in a time that the U.S. began to really see the importance of dads. Brother Maddox, it was all around me. It was in teen group. We were having 5 series lessons on what the home was supposed to be like, and it seemed like every year somebody was coming in, Dr. Vaughn, or they were coming in speaking on the home, or there were videos on the home. There was just this mad push in the mid '80s for let's look back at the home, and I believe that's because of what happened prior to it. I'll give just a quick history. It's just my opinion, but Karl Marx said, "The tradition of past generation weighs like the Alps on the brains of the living." And then he would go on from that statement, Lorraine would go on from that statement, basically saying, your views of life weigh like the mountain on clays. He can't have his own views of life because the views you've placed on him. So he would go on to say that in order to change society, for it to roll over and become a more socialist society, a more quote-unquote utopian society, you must break the connection between the generations. You must separate the power of the home, which makes sense. You know, Satan's been fighting against anything God's put his authority behind. And I believe that almost happened in the 60s, late 60s, early 70s. I mean, if you go back and look, you had rebellion against everything. Every authority was being rebelled against. Every authority was being attacked. You had the anti-war, and some of these overlapped, but you definitely had all of these philosophies. You had the anti-war philosophy saying government is just terrible. You had the hippie generation that just said everyone should be free with no restraints. You had the drug culture. You had the free love culture, which is basically just no boundaries. And then you had the growing of the rock culture, which is anti-everything. And it almost swung, but God. And the result of but God was it swang back the other way. Swang, that's probably not a good word. It went back the other way. And that's the time I grew up. There was this huge backlash, and there were studies on the home, and these studies showed that teen sexuality and drug use and violence and depression and suicide and teen murder rates largely corresponded to the absence of dad in the home. Over 70% of teens arrested come from homes with no dads. Now, you can find these numbers higher or lower, depends on where you look, because we really can't tell. It's too big a problem to measure. I'll tell you this, Mike Singletary, who I didn't like very much when he played because he played for Chicago. I don't like anything from Chicago, New York, San Francisco, LA. I just don't like those cities. Philadelphia. But if you're from Pittsburgh, you're golden. Mike Singletary, who grew up without a father and played for the Chicago Bears, great middle linebacker, one of the top five. After he retired, he has a very strong prison ministry. And somewhere in the beginning of his talk in the prison, he always starts with this question. Let me ask, how many of you had a good relationship with your father? His testimony is that he's never had a single hand raised. That speaks volumes. Over 40 years ago, Dr. Dobson would say this, the Western world is at its greatest crossroad in history. Blah, 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 blah. Its survival as a people will depend upon the presence or absence of masculine leadership. I believe with all that is in me that the preservation of our society depends on fathers. Now, that's pretty powerful. Now, let me tell you some numbers. Over 20 million kids today are in homes without fathers. It is estimated that 62 million people in America are growing up, because there's 20 million of them, are growing up today or grew up without fathers. You can find numbers as high as 80% of inner city children have no fathers. But Hank, remember, unless fathers turn to their children and children to their fathers, judgment's coming. We are living through that right now. And these numbers, 20 million, 62 million, 80%, we're just not talking about good fathers. That's just talking about present fathers. Even if you're there, you know you got some bad fathers. The destruction, the burden, the pressure on our youth. Now, let me tell you something that's curious. I've had 2 weeks to start to try to look up some of this stuff. If you begin to search, you're going to find lots of information from the 80s till about 2012. Lots of reports, lots of studies, lots of things. It's just inundated. Check the date. Almost all of them are going to be between 1980 and the year 2012. There is almost nothing that shows up after the year 2012. Why is that? I'll give you 3 reasons, I think. I gotta hurry. One, I think, is the feminist movement. the no gender, no role, no men needed movement. One of the founders of the feminist movement is Margaret Mead. She's an anthropologist. She died in the late 70s, but it is her writing that really, it's still used in colleges. It's what's pushed it out there. This is what she said, and you can look this up. Read her whole writing. It's ridiculous. Man's role is uncertain, undefined, and perhaps unnecessary. Those she were teaching would later go on to say that the Y chromosome, which makes you man, is probably just a mutation, and men shouldn't even be here. Oof. Brother Hank did it. How in the world do we perpetrate a society? How crazy is that? And it is wreaking havoc on our society today. It is the destruction of roles and responsibilities. Just give me this. Okay, well, they've got that, and they're still not happy. I think the government, let me try to paint this in a nice way. In a nice way. I think federal politicians tried to help people in need, well-meaning from their heart. Well-meaning from their heart. No control or malice intended. But they ignored biblical teachings. Those biblical teachings say that men are inherently evil, and even if you give them a good thing, we'll twist it and make a mess out of it. And what they tried to do is they tried to reach out and help people who were in need. They did this by subsidizing things. Well, we should have learned that whatever the government subsidized, we end up getting consumed by. It's kind of a funny study if you go back and look at it. But in the 30s, they wanted to increase pork production. So they subsidized farmers, especially in the Midwest, to raise pigs. 8 years later, you have all these pictures of them digging huge holes and pushing pigs that have just been slaughtered into these holes and covering up with dirt because there were so many of them, it was killing the market. They were just inundated with pork, and so they pushed them into these pits. Well, I'm going to tell you what they've subsidized is broken homes. They've subsidized multiple children and no dad. Now, some of this is controlled federally and some of it is controlled by state. I don't know everything in this state. I don't want to know everything in this state. I can't handle it. But I know some of this just from housing support. I know that I had people work for me, and I asked them why they never got married, and the reason they never got married is because they would lose support. Therefore, the government incentivized them to stay separate. I know a woman who used to go to church here who did not buy a car because if she bought a car, her rent at her subsidized apartment would double. Remember, how is she supposed to build a life? How is she supposed? No, she's kept in that little spot. And then you talk about the earned income tax credit. I can't talk about it long because we're going to pay someone $10,000, $12,000, $14,000 because they have multiple children. That would be a wonderful thing if they used that $10,000, $12,000, $14,000 to build a life. But it's usually used on things like vacations or TVs or cars or tattoos or always saying, I want more and I want more and I want more. The government has done so much to destroy the home. We have subsidized broken homes and our country is now full of them. It's a far cry from like 1998 when the Surgeon General said the destruction of the American family is the most significant social issue of our time. Now we don't even hear about it. And then the third is the media. You know, we've gone from father knows best to father knows nothing to where is father? My time it was father knows nothing. Now you don't even have to have a dad in the picture. I don't know where the kid came from, but there doesn't need to be a dad. So, why do you think? Well, I think we deal with a media and an elite in Hollywood that hate God. And if you hate God, you're going to hate the way he set things up. And so you're going to rebel against it. And it's all around us and inundates us. And if we don't have the washing of the word, it starts to make sense. 5 minutes. I still think the responsibility is for fathers to turn the hearts of their children towards the Father. So how can we do that? 4 quick thoughts. One is we have to initiate communication. The average dad in the home, so this is a dad who's there, spends 37 seconds a day in conversation with their child. When you say, that might have been me, I'm sorry, but it's the past, I can't change the past. Now the child's moved out and there's nothing I can do and I don't want to keep hearing about this because it's the past. Well, Lorraine, the kids move out. I'm experiencing this. When you do, you want to cry. Angie and I go out to eat with you. We'll cry together. But I've learned it doesn't stop. It just changes. The responsibility is still there. And I'll give you a great picture. You know Proverbs? Read Proverbs chapter 1, Proverbs chapter 2. My son, my son, my son, my son. Then read the stuff he's talking to him about. This is not an 8-year-old. Proverbs is written to a grown man. Brother Maddox, if we don't learn from the past, we repeat it and it stays the same. We need to invest in our children. And we're not going to get 3 more done. I talked about that book. Preacher, I talked about this book. You gave me a book a long time ago, 15 years ago maybe. It was written by a referee. Do you remember that book? It was a great book. The whole first couple chapters, I loved it because it said, don't be afraid to make the call. Don't be afraid to do something. Don't stand on this. Don't just get a check. Be involved. I love that part of the book. But then there was also this kind of part of the book where it was, and don't apologize for the bad call. Ooh, Donnie, I didn't like that part of the book. Let me tell you, as a coach, if I call up the referee, if I waste the time out to talk to the referee and say, hey, watch that holding, he can tell me I didn't see it. You know what? Nothing I can do. I'm going to calm down. If he tells me that wasn't holding, now we're fighting over what was right. He could calm that whole thing down just by his attitude. Let me tell you, as a dad, I can deny to Josh when I'm wrong, but you know who knows I was wrong? All I'm doing is losing credibility. He just sat right there. But Miss Debbie, the minute I tell him, you know what? Josh, I'm sorry I was divisive. I'm sorry I got so angry. I'm sorry I mishandled this situation. You know who all the pressure's on now. Grow up and be a man. Learn to be forgiving. The past is the past. I can't do anything about it. No, but you can learn from it. And there's an instant way to reunite. It starts by confession. Confess our faults one to another. We need to be a lawgiver. I'll just say this. We also need to be a grace giver. They go together. Josh McDowell surveyed teens at a teen camp. He asked, where would you go in a crisis? Dad was number 48 on the list. That's ridiculous. So the next day he did a follow-up and asked, why was it so far? Dad wouldn't listen. Dad doesn't care. Dad doesn't understand. Well, I think rules are necessary, but I don't think rules ever transform. Rules are necessary, but it's a relationship that transforms. And we need to build relationships. We need to teach and reward character and responsibility, not talent. We need to be the protector. Preacher, I've had more time. You gave me a great illustration for this morning, but I'm out of time. And we need to be the mentor. We need to show humility and show patience and show the servant love. We need to show wisdom, and that starts by showing dependence. If we'll be dependent, because all of this goes back to Ephesians chapter 5, verse 18. Those who are full of the Spirit. If we're going to be a good dad, we must be a godly dad, and that means we need to walk in his Spirit. Brother Moyer, we close in a word of prayer this morning.